Thanks for joining us again today as we look into this Passion Week story and as we try to come alive this Easter, as we see what the Bible says, as we think about what Jesus did. Now, today's story is a lot less popular than the ones we just did or the ones we're going to do in future days, so maybe you haven't really thought a lot about it. And right after Jesus flips the tables of the money changers, the next day, he actually spends a lot of time speaking to the people in the temple courts and teaching in the temple courts. And in chapter 22 and 23 of Matthew, that's what we see happen. And then in chapter 24 of Matthew, we see him get away alone with his disciples. These things happen on Tuesday. And we're going to look today at the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. This is a private sermon that Jesus gives to his disciples. He pulls away with them after speaking to the crowds, after they try to trap him and get him to say dumb things, and as they're trying to get Jesus crucified, as they're still trying to get him to stop speaking. He pulls away with his own disciples, and he sits down and he gives them some last-minute messages that he really needs them to know before he goes to the cross. And so here we look at, in chapter 24, the signs of the end of the age. Then he goes into some parables about the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, the sheep, and the goats. These are kingdom parables. And so first, I just want to talk for a couple minutes about the signs of the end of the age, because Jesus wanted them to know that after he left, there was going to be a lot of struggle. There was still going to be a lot of persecution. And eventually the end would come, the final judgment day, which he talks about in the sheep and the goats. But first, he says the signs of the end of the age, and he gives them all sorts of warning signs of what it's going to look like when that day comes. He says no one knows the day or the hour, but he gives them signs of the season. And so read through that chapter and check it out. But I just wanted to look at a couple verses really quickly. In verse 9, he says, you're going to be handed over to be persecuted. Wow, that's pretty intense. You'll be hated by all nations because of me. Pretty intense. Maybe not good news to the disciples. Hey, you're going to leave us and everyone's going to hate us. Then verse 10 says, at that time, many will turn away from the faith and betray and hate each other. So the crowd was going to get smaller. Some people were going to leave it. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Verse 12, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. Wow, that's crazy. But those who stand firm to the end will be saved. So the love of most will grow cold. It feels like we're seeing that in today's world, doesn't it? The love of most has grown cold. There's wars, there's hatred, and the love of many has grown cold. And then he says this to them, verse 14. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So in order for the end to come, we have to go through these sorts of trials, but the gospel has to be preached to all nations. If the end hasn't come, that means the gospel hasn't been preached to all nations. This was kind of like a pre-Great Commission message. In Matthew 28, he's going to give them that Great Commission message, but in here it's like he gives them an introduction to that, and he says, times are going to get hard after I leave. In a few days, we're going to look at all the things that get so much better because of that. But he says, times are going to get hard. There's going to be hard things after I leave. The end is going to come. It's going to be intense. And the love of many is going to grow cold, but you're going to have a job to do. The gospel needs to go to all nations, and then the end will come. What part of that are you today? Are you letting persecution, the love of many growing cold, people not wanting to hear your message, the hatred in the world today, are you letting that stop you from believing the true message? Are you letting that stop you from being the one that wants to share that message? Let this verse encourage us that if times are hard, that means the importance of the gospel is there, and it's more important than ever that we share it, because the end hasn't come yet. But when the end comes, he gives them a warning about that, and that's the parable of the sheep and the goats, and you can read that on your own. But on the final judgment day, God's going to bring a judgment, and to those that knew him, who believed in him, to receive this message, he's going to say, hey, come. I've got a place prepared for you. Come. Enter my rest. And to those that refuse the message, or he says, he's going to call them the goats, and he's going to say, depart from me. I never knew you. And interestingly enough, those that he says, depart from me to, they expected that he was pleased with them. Those that were surprised that he welcomed, those that he welcomed were surprised that he welcomed them. And so don't just assume that you know you're right. Just get into the Word and study it and make sure that you know. Let this Passion Week devotional, give you an appetite for the Word, that you're studying it and getting into it. You're exploring it, but you're letting the Spirit speak to you, and that you're coming alive this Easter as you discover more truth, as you get in the Word and let God speak to you personally. And so, thanks for listening today. Now go read. Now go read the Bible and let it change you. My prayer again is that you come alive this Easter. God bless you.